Welcome back to Z Sci-Fi Stories, our deeply valued listeners. We must humbly share that YouTube has recently disabled our channel monetization, leaving us entirely without an operating budget. If you find today's story captivating, please consider supporting us with just $1 so our dedicated staff can cover their living expenses and continue creating these universes for you. You can offer your support by scanning the QR code currently on your screen, or by clicking the donation link found in the video description or the pinned comment. Now, let us begin. At the geometric heart of the Aegis system, the Supreme Council of the Elder Races basked in the blinding glow of their own infallibility. They were gathered in the grand obsidian amphitheater of the capital world, celebrating exactly 10,000 years of absolute, unbroken peace. This was not a harmony born of mutual understanding or shared empathy among the stars. It was a sterile, enforced tranquility maintained by the Aegis grid, an interconnected web of pure energy that wrapped their central worlds in an impenetrable, shimmering golden shell. The High Lords and ethereal delegates moved with the slow, deliberate grace of beings who believed they had conquered the very concept of danger. They were immortal in their arrogance, certain that the cosmos had finally been tamed under their supreme intellect. Then, the fabric of reality simply gave up. It did not happen along any of the sanctioned, heavily monitored hyperspace transit lanes. It did not register on their flawless, tachyon predictive models. Space itself, violently fractured, tearing open an illogical, bleeding wound in the vacuum directly above their sacred capital. The physical laws that the alien scholars worshipped as absolute divinities were casually discarded in a heartbeat. Light bent backwards, gravity inverted. Time around the anomaly seemed to freeze and shatter like brittle glass. From the silent, cosmic violence of the rift, a structure slowly emerged. It was an abyssal, matte black leviathan of forged metal, so dark that it seemed to devour the surrounding starlight rather than reflect it. Etched across its bruised, hyper-dense armored flank was a single, archaic insignia reading Terran. The vessel broadcasted no active weapon signatures. It emitted no declarations of war or demands for surrender. Yet, its mere physical presence was a catastrophic violation of the system. The static mass of the dead dreadnought was so incomprehensibly heavy that the gravitational shear instantly dragged the three nearest orbital moons off their meticulously calculated trajectories, causing tidal anomalies that swept across the oceans of the worlds below. Down on the polished floors of the Supreme Council Command Center, the serene silence was obliterated by a deafening chorus of system failures. The planetary defense radars and quantum analytical engines screamed in digital agony before crashing entirely. They could not process the energy signature bleeding from the dark vessel to their perfect machines. It was an impossible variable, a ghost in the physics engine of the universe. High commanders, beings who had not felt the icy touch of fear in 10 millennia, watched their invincible holographic screens flicker, distort, and die. Panic, a primal, long-forgotten emotion they believed they had evolved far beyond, suddenly seized their synthetic hearts. They shouted orders that no system could execute, watching helplessly as the monolithic shadow of humanity blotted out their sun. Deep within the lightless, frozen belly of the anomalous dreadnought, the atmosphere was thick with the harsh scent of ozone, sterile chemical fluids, and ancient frost. Eric Birch did not step out of his chronological stasis pod with the dignified grace of a legendary hero. He tumbled heavily onto the freezing steel-grated floor, retching violently as his atrophied lungs desperately remembered how to process raw oxygen. Eric was not a decorated fleet admiral. He was not a genetically enhanced super soldier bred for galactic conquest. He was a low-ranking, utterly unremarkable maintenance engineer whose highest security clearance involved fixing jammed plasma conduits in the lower decks. The ship automated emergency revival protocol had violently pulled him from a cryo-sleep that had lasted for untold thousands of years. Shivering uncontrollably in his thin, standard-issue jumpsuit, Eric leaned heavily against the frosted, cracked glass of his pod and wiped the thick condensation from his burning eyes. "Computer, give me a status report," he rasped, his dry voice echoing far too loudly in the cavernous, dimly lit hall. There was no synthesized response. The emergency lumen strips flickered erratically, casting long, shifting shadows down an endless row of adjacent stasis pods. Eric stumbled forward, his boots clanking against the metal. He wiped the frost off the nearest pod, then the next and the next. Every single one of them was wide open, their life support tubes dangling loosely like severed mechanical veins. His crewmates, his shift commander, the thousands of souls he had gone to sleep alongside, were simply gone. They had vanished without leaving a single trace of biological residue or a sign of struggle. Panic rising in his chest. Eric ran over to the nearest observation terminal at the end of the hall. He frantically wiped a thick layer of cosmic dust from the screen and initiated a manual reboot. As the navigation data slowly compiled on the cracked display, his breath hitched, and a profound dread washed over him. The star charts displayed outside the reinforced viewport matched absolutely nothing in the original navigation registry of Earth. He was completely alone, adrift in an alien time and in alien space, totally unaware that just beyond the thick armor of his drifting tomb, an empire of gods was preparing to go to war against him. High Admiral Kalen stood rigid on the crystalline bridge of the flagship Vanguard, his gold-flecked eyes locked onto the colossal black anomaly floating in the void. Orbiting the intruder was a blockade of exactly 700 of the most heavily armed warships ever constructed by the Elder Council. They were vessels of elegant white light and polished silver, looking like angels surrounding a demon. "Target the unknown structure," Kalen commanded, his voice trembling imperceptibly despite his centuries of martial discipline. "Fire the singularity lances. Maximum yield. Erase it from our sky." From hundreds of pristine dreadnoughts, blinding pillars of superheated coherent light erupted in perfect unison. It was an attack powerful enough to crack a small planet in half. But the expected nuclear detonation never manifested. As the devastating beams of pure plasma struck the dark metal flank, the light did not shatter, nor did it reflect. Instead, the energy inexplicably bent. The brilliant lasers coiled like liquid and were seamlessly absorbed right into the matte black armor, disappearing into the dark metal without leaving so much as a single scorch mark. The tactical officers on the Vanguard stared at their holographic displays in frozen, uncomprehending horror. The thermal output of the Terran vessel had not risen by even 1/10 of a degree. It had simply eaten their strongest weapons. On the capital world below, the High Council watched the tactical failure in stunned, breathless silence. Grand Minister Vale turned to the High Priestess of the Neural Caste, his face pale. "If our physical weapons cannot break its shell, you must pierce its mind. Read the consciousness of whatever commands this beast. Find its weakness." The High Priestess knelt on the obsidian floor, linking her mind with a coven of exactly 100 master telepaths. They projected their collective consciousness upward, expecting to encounter the cold, hyper-logical matrix of a supreme artificial intelligence or the transcendent, orderly thoughts of an ascended cosmic being. Instead, they slammed headfirst into a psychic brick wall of overwhelming, disjointed chaos. Up in the freezing, lightless belly of the Terran vessel, Eric Birch was aggressively rubbing his temples, his mind racing a mile a minute. "Where is the crew? Did the life support malfunction? Why does my stomach hurt so much? Did I leave the thermal heater on in my bunk before cryo? How long have I been asleep? I cannot believe I am going to die up here, without even knowing who won the World Series." To the highly refined, strictly orderly minds of the elder races, This flood of panicked, mundane, rapidly shifting human thoughts felt like a psychic hurricane. It was an assault of pure, unfiltered madness. The High Priestess collapsed onto the marble floor, screaming in agony as dark blood poured from her eyes. "It is a legion!" she shrieked, clutching her skull, while the other telepaths writhed around her. "There is no order, only a maelstrom of roaring, unhinged voices. It thinks of burning heaters and dead crews and meaningless sports. It is a mind of pure chaos." Absolute panic erupted in the Grand Council chamber. Dignitaries who had not raised their voices in 200 years began shouting over one another. A trembling archivist rushed to the center podium, clutching a crumbling datapad extracted from the deepest, most forbidden historical vaults. "The insignia etched on the hull," the archivist gasped, projecting the word Terran onto the main display for all to see. "It translates to an ancient, cursed tongue. They are the demons from the first epoch. We thought the universe purged them over 3 million years ago. This is a god-killing weapon. They have returned from the abyss to judge our arrogance." Paranoia spread like a highly contagious plague. Fleet commanders across the Armada began drawing sidearms on their own officers, terrified that the chaotic mind of the demon ship was already infecting their ranks. They were absolutely certain the Black Leviathan was charging up a doomsday strike that would reduce their utopian worlds to ash. Completely oblivious to the galactic political meltdown happening right outside his frosted window, Eric Birch was shivering violently at a rusty auxiliary communications console. He had finally managed to jump-start the primary battery loop using a spare wrench and some frayed copper wiring. "Okay, keep it simple, Eric," he muttered to himself, his breath fogging the cracked glass of the ancient monitor. "Standard first contact protocols. Just say hello and ask for a tow." He keyed in a basic binary greeting, translating his desperate plea into standard, low-frequency analog radio waves. "This is United Earth Vessel. I come in peace. We require immediate assistance. Please respond." He slammed his heavy fist onto the glowing green broadcast button. Because the elder races had evolved past basic radio technology hundreds of thousands of years ago, their entire communication network relied on incredibly fragile, delicate quantum entanglement threads. When Eric broadcast his primitive, analog message, the sheer, unrefined density of the low-frequency bandwidth acted like a sledgehammer, swinging through a gallery of fragile glass sculptures. The crude radio wave slammed into the alien fleet. Instantly, every holographic screen in the Armada shattered into static. The neural communication grids went completely dark. The planetary defense mainframes blue-screened, dropping the orbital shields. For exactly 5 full minutes, the most powerful empire in the galaxy was plunged into absolute, terrifying blindness and deafening silence. When the backup analog systems finally flickered back to life, the High Admiral dropped to his knees on his flagship bridge. He looked at his terrified officers, his face drained of all color, his voice a hollow whisper. "It blinded our entire armada with a single electronic pulse. It did not even bother to power up its weapons. We are completely, utterly at its mercy." Strike Captain Zier led the Phantom Vanguard, a unit composed of exactly 12 of the most lethal operatives in the Elder Empire. They glided through the breached airlock of the abyssal vessel, their pristine silver combat armor starkly illuminating the suffocating, rusted darkness. The atmosphere inside was oppressive, a crushing silence broken only by the rhythmic, unnatural groaning of the shifting hull. They expected automated defense turrets, complex laser grids, or legions of demonic super soldiers waiting in ambush. Instead, the narrow corridors stretched endlessly, choked with loose cables that hung from the ceiling, like the dead vines of a mechanical jungle. The temperature was freezing, dropping several degrees with every step they took deeper into the Leviathan. Zier signaled his squad to advance down Sector 4. The claustrophobia was immediate and overwhelming. The ceilings were far too low, forcing the tall, elegant warriors to stoop uncomfortably. Every jagged shadow cast by their shoulder-mounted lamps seemed to harbor a lethal threat. They pushed through a heavy, manual bulkhead and stepped into a massive, humid chamber, bathed in an eerie, flickering ultraviolet glow. It was the ship Botanical Bay, though the aliens had absolutely no concept of such primitive, agricultural crudeness. To them, the sight was a nightmare of grotesque proportions. Giant steel vats of bubbling brown sludge fed thick, pulsating green roots. Mechanical limbs with syringe-like appendages rhythmically pierced the soil, injecting harsh chemical nutrients into twisting, mutated flora. Zaire gripped his plasma rifle, his twin hearts hammering furiously against his ribs. "By the ancestors," he whispered over the encrypted communication channel. "It is a sacrificial breeding ground. They are harvesting organic life to fuel their dark engines. Stay vigilant. The Beast Masters must be nearby." Exactly 3 decks above them, the supposed Beastmaster was currently cursing bitterly under his breath while violently kicking a jammed maintenance locker. Eric Birch had spent the last 2 hours blindly navigating the pitch-black labyrinth of the engineering deck, desperately trying to find the primary electrical fuse box. He was freezing cold, deeply terrified, and nursing a massive, throbbing headache. He gripped a heavy, rusted metal wrench in his right hand, using his bare left hand to trace the freezing steel wall until his fingers finally brushed against a bulky, metallic panel. "Finally," Eric muttered aloud, prying the heavy metal cover open with the wrench. The panel was a chaotic, tangled mess of unmarked toggle switches and frayed copper wires. Relying entirely on his muscle memory from a safety training seminar he had barely paid attention to 10 years ago, Eric grabbed the largest, red-handled lever in the center of the board and yanked it downward with all his remaining strength. He prayed quietly for the overhead lights to illuminate the pitch-black corridor. Down in Sector 4, the response was immediate, but it was certainly not illumination. A deafening, mechanical warning siren shattered the silence, echoing violently off the metal walls. Before Zaire could issue a single command, foot-thick, solid titanium blast doors slammed down from the ceiling at both ends of the Botanical Bay, sealing the 12 elite warriors inside a hermetic, inescapable tomb. "Ambush!" Zaire roared, raising his weapon as the walls began to hiss. From hidden ventilation, grates along the ceiling, a thick, white chemical fog began pouring into the sealed room. It was the ship automated deep sterilization protocol, designed to rapidly flood the sector with 99% pure oxygen mixed with a highly concentrated, pine-scented industrial disinfectant. To the elder races, who breathed a delicate, nitrogen-rich atmospheric blend, the sudden aggressive spike of pure oxygen felt like breathing liquid fire. Their internal biomonitors shrieked desperate warnings of severe toxicity. Poison gas. One of the operatives choked out, falling heavily to his knees as the harsh, biting scent of artificial pine overwhelmed his helmet scrubbers. "The demons are dissolving our lungs." As the strike team blindly fired their plasma weapons at the ceiling vents, the floor panels slid open. Half a dozen low-profile, disc-shaped cleaning drones rolled out onto the deck. The machines were armed with absolutely nothing more than rapidly spinning bristle brushes, heavy-duty floor wax, and a single, blinking red sensor light. Following their ancient programming to scrub the newly contaminated sector, the drones zeroed in on the foreign organic matter. They rushed the alien warriors, aggressively bumping into their silver boots, spinning their hard bristles against the pristine armor while emitting angry, high-pitched mechanical beeps whenever their forward path was blocked. "They have unleashed mechanical parasites," Zaire screamed, kicking wildly at a small round drone that was persistently trying to polish his shin guard. Another operative fired a point-blank plasma round directly at an incoming drone. but the heavy industrial casing of the floor buffer merely absorbed the intense heat. The drone aggressively bumped into him again, spraying a generous coat of soapy cleaning foam completely over his boots. It was utter, humiliating terror. The greatest, most lethal warriors of the entire galaxy were trapped in a steel box, crying out in genuine fear while being relentlessly and aggressively cleaned by blind, unthinking machines. Meanwhile, on the command deck, Eric finally found a security terminal that still had a trickle of power. The screen flickered to life, bringing up the internal camera feeds. He clicked frantically through the static-filled channels until he found a live broadcast from Sector 4. He leaned in close, squinting hard at the grainy, black-and-white surveillance footage. His jaw dropped open. He fully expected to see a ruptured steam pipe, or maybe a very large stray space rat. Instead, he saw 12 7-foot-tall, heavily armored alien figures trapped inside a decontamination lock. They were wildly shooting glowing energy weapons at the ship's standard janitorial Roombas, thrashing around blindly in the pine-scented fog in an absolute state of hysterics. Eric stumbled backwards from the console, the heavy wrench slipping from his sweaty palm and clattering loudly onto the metal floor. "Aliens," he whispered, his voice cracking violently. "Actual, real-life aliens." He clutched the sides of his head, his breathing spiraling quickly into a full-blown panic attack. He was trapped alone on a dead ship with a squad of highly armed, hostile extraterrestrials who were currently actively trying to blow up the automated floor buffers. He realized in that agonizing second that he was completely, hopelessly out of his depth, and he was absolutely just as terrified of them as they were of the cleaning robots. Eric Birch dragged his exhausted body to the primary command terminal, his hands shaking violently as he navigated the archaic linguistic matrix of the ship. It was a bulky, rudimentary translation, artificial intelligence designed for peaceful first contact scenarios over 3 million years ago. With a heavy sigh, he engaged the visual broadcasting array, forcibly punching a raw, unencrypted video feed directly into the main viewing screen of the alien flagship, hovering just outside his viewport. The rusted monitors on his console flared to life, revealing the towering, majestic figure of High Admiral Kalen. The alien commander stood rigid, his golden armor gleaming, though his eyes betrayed a profound, thinly veiled terror. Kalen spoke, and the ancient Terran artificial intelligence translated the complex alien dialect into a flat, synthesized English voice that echoed through the freezing command deck. "Demon of Terra," Kalen declared, his voice trembling with absolute desperate resolve. "You have breached the sacred domain of the Elder Council. We know what you are. We know the dark legends of your kind. We demand that you immediately deactivate your doomsday engine. If you do not power down your superweapon within exactly 60 seconds, we will overload the central core of our own sun. We will trigger a localized supernova and burn our entire star system to ash just to ensure your destruction. You will not harvest our worlds." Eric stared at the monitor. He looked at the magnificent, terrified alien warlord, threatening to commit galactic suicide to stop a maintenance worker who could barely find the light switch. The sheer, unfathomable absurdity of the situation finally broke whatever fragile composure Eric had left. He dropped his head into his hands and began to laugh. It was not a maniacal, evil laugh. It was a dry, broken, desperate sound of a man whose sanity was hanging by a single, fraying thread. His laughter echoed through the open communication channel, chilling the blood of the Elder Council members who were watching the feed on their capital world. "A superweapon," Eric wheezed, wiping a tear from his dirt-streaked face. He looked directly into the camera lens, his eyes hollow and deeply tired. "You think this floating graveyard is a warship? You think we came here to conquer you?" Eric turned to the engineering console and began typing frantically, pulling up the deepest, most classified telemetry data stored in the ship mainframe. Listen to me very carefully. My species did not build this vessel to destroy gods. We built it because we were terrified of the dark. This is not a dreadnought. It is a stellar anchor. It is a desperate millions of years old engineering project designed to hold the universe together. He hit a command key, forcing the ship deep space sensor logs onto the visual feed for the entire alien armada to see. The pristine, glowing holographic maps of the Aegis system that the aliens worshipped were instantly replaced by the raw, unedited gravitational topography recorded by the Terran sensors. The revelation was apocalyptic. The golden, perfect star system of the elder races was not a naturally occurring sanctuary. It was sitting directly on top of a massive, catastrophic structural fracture in the fabric of reality. "Look at what you have done," Eric said, his voice dropping to a heavy, mournful whisper. "Your perfect civilization, your impenetrable energy grids, your 10,000 years of absolute peace. Do you know how your technology actually works? You have been blindly siphoning raw dark matter from the foundational bedrock of the universe. You have spent tens of thousands of years draining the structural integrity of your own space to power your glowing cities." On the flagship Vanguard, High Admiral Kalen stared at the cascading data streams. The mathematical proofs were undeniable, written in the universal language of physics that bypassed all cultural misunderstandings. The space surrounding their worlds was not a fortress. It was an overstretched soap bubble, thinned to the absolute breaking point by their own parasitic consumption. "My ship did not attack your system," Eric continued, his voice echoing in the dead silence of the alien bridge. "We did not tear a hole in your sky. Your reality is collapsing inward under the weight of your own ignorance. My ship was just drifting through the void when the immense gravitational vacuum of your collapsing bubble pulled us in. We fell through the cracking ice that you created." The horror that washed over the High Council and the fleet commanders was fundamentally different from the fear they had felt just moments before. The primal terror of being conquered by a demonic Terran entity evaporated, instantly replaced by a crushing, existential despair. Their entire worldview, their profound belief in their own divine superiority, shattered into a billion meaningless pieces. They were not the enlightened guardians of the cosmos. They were nothing more than ignorant, glowing parasites who had spent thousands of years slowly and methodically destroying the very foundation of their own home. Grand Minister Vial slumped heavily onto his crystalline throne on the capital world, his hands trembling as he stared at the terrifying Terran data. The invincible empire of the elder races was a total lie. The anomaly in their sky was not the bringer of the apocalypse. It was simply the heavy tombstone, arriving just in time for their funeral. The profound silence that had fallen over the alien communication channels did not last. While Grand Minister Vale and High Admiral Kalen sat paralyzed by the terrifying revelation, a violent schism erupted within the lower ranks of the Elder Council. Lord Commander Varric, a radical fanatic of the military caste, refused to let his fragile worldview shatter so easily. Standing on the pristine bridge of the heavy cruiser Zenith, Varric drew his energy sidearm and executed his own captain in cold blood. "This is an illusion," Varric roared, violently seizing the primary command console. "It is Terran psychological warfare. They are projecting false telemetry to paralyze us while they charge their weapons. All loyal ships, break formation and target the demon vessel. Fire the core plasma cannon." Before High Admiral Kalen could broadcast a fleet-wide countermand to stop the treasonous order, exactly 45 heavily armed warships broke away from the main blockade. They synchronized their primary weapon systems, drawing immense, raw power directly from the central sun of the Aegis system. A blinding, apocalyptic beam of superheated plasma, burning at well over 50 million degrees, surged across the dark void and slammed directly into the flank of the Terran dreadnought. The matte black armor of the ancient human ship did not break. It did not melt, nor did it even dent. But the sheer, localized concentration of extreme hyperenergy was the final, fatal blow to the already dying fabric of local space. The structural tension of the universe simply snapped. Reality did not just tear. It shattered violently, like a massive pane of glass struck by a heavy hammer. A catastrophic void storm erupted outward from the point of impact, an expanding hurricane of absolute nothingness. It was not a naturally occurring black hole. It was a complete absence of physics, a jagged, bleeding rift where the universe simply ceased to exist. The shockwave of the tearing reality rolled outward at unimaginable speeds, violently swallowing the light of the surrounding stars and plunging the sector into total darkness. Total anarchy instantly consumed the invincible armada. The chaotic gravitational shear of the void storm grabbed the majestic silver warships, spinning them wildly out of control like dry leaves in a hurricane. Panic overtook the mutinous crews. Blinded by the intense spatial distortion and completely cut off from their central command, the alien vessels began wildly firing their weapons upon one another in the dark. Brilliant flashes of scattered laser fire illuminated the chaos as pristine dreadnoughts tore each other to pieces. Their burning wreckage instantly sucked into the expanding maw of the storm. Inside the Terran dreadnought, the command deck was shaking so violently that Eric Birch was thrown forcefully against the steel bulkhead. Blaring red emergency lights bathed the room in a bloody, pulsing glow. The automated ship system voice echoed through the chaotic noise. Warning: dimensional collapse in exactly 4 minutes. Complete structural failure is imminent. Eric crawled frantically back to the main engineering terminal, warm blood pouring from a deep cut on his forehead. He bypassed the blaring warning screens, desperately searching the archaic database for a solution. The ship was a stellar anchor. It was literally built to fix this exact problem. He quickly found the emergency protocol for the primary quantum engine core. If he could manually trigger a cold restart of the engines, the resulting wave of reality anchoring energy would instantly stitch the tear shut. He slammed his bloody fist onto the execution command key. Error, the flat, synthesized voice reported back. Manual restart sequence requires simultaneous physical activation at Terminal Alpha and Terminal Beta. The distance between the two terminals is exactly 300 feet. Dual operators are strictly required. Eric stared at the flashing red screen in pure, unfiltered horror. He was completely alone. He could not possibly be in two places at once. The countdown timer on the screen ticked down to exactly 3 minutes. Then, he remembered the internal security camera feed. Eric grabbed his heavy metal wrench, kicked the console away, and sprinted blindly down the darkened, shaking corridors. He threw himself down the narrow maintenance stairwells, his lungs burning, and his legs aching as he raced toward Sector 4. Gravity fluctuated wildly around him, throwing him against the walls as the ship groaned in mechanical agony. The heavy metal plates screeched as the void storm outside tried to crush the hull like an empty aluminum can. He finally reached the heavy titanium blast doors of the botanical bay. He slammed his hands onto the manual override panel, ripping the metal cover off and violently yanking the emergency release lever downward. The heavy doors hissed loudly and slowly slid open. The thick chemical fog poured out into the hallway, smelling strongly of industrial pine cleaner. Inside the bay, the 12 elite warriors of the Phantom Vanguard were slumped exhausted against the walls. They were completely covered from head to toe in thick white soap foam, their pristine silver armor scuffed and dripping wet. The robotic floor buffers were still aggressively bumping into their heavy boots, beeping happily as they continued their programmed cleaning cycles. Strike Captain Zier looked up, his plasma rifle trembling in his exhausted hands as he aimed the weapon directly at the human. Eric did not stop. He ran straight into the contaminated room, kicking one of the happy cleaning drones out of his way. He reached down and grabbed the armored collar of the towering alien commander, pulling him forcefully to his feet. Zier was so stunned by the sheer audacity of the small, unarmored human that he did not even pull the trigger. Listen to me, Eric screamed over the deafening roar of the dying ship. Your fleet just ripped a hole in the universe in exactly 2 minutes. This entire solar system is going to be completely erased from existence. I can stop it. But I need a second pair of hands right now. Drop your pride, drop your gun, and come with me, or your entire empire dies today. Zir stared down at the desperate, bleeding human. The absolute pride of the elder races demanded that he strike down the Terran demon right there on the spot. But through the open blast doors, Zir could hear the terrifying, unnatural tearing of space itself. He looked back at his terrified, soap-covered squad, realizing the human was telling the absolute truth. The alien commander slowly lowered his weapon, then threw his heavy plasma rifle onto the wet floor. "Lead the way, human," Zir commanded, his voice tight with a desperate, unified resolve. Outside the shattered viewport of the engineering deck, the universe was being actively unwritten. The void storm had expanded into an unfathomable maw of absolute nothingness, its event horizon scraping the upper atmosphere of the capital world. On the pristine surface below, trillions of immortal citizens looked up in pure, unadulterated terror. The sky, which had known exactly 10,000 years of artificial golden daylight, was instantly swallowed by an abyss so profound it began to bend the very light of the stars. Giant crystalline spires groaned as gravity itself inverted, ripping heavy chunks of marble into the sky. Death, an abstract concept the Elder Council had arrogantly banished ages ago, was now exactly 3 minutes away from consuming their entire civilization. Deep within the shaking, dying heart of the Terran vessel, Eric Birch gripped the heavy brass lever of Terminal Alpha. His muscles burned, and blood dripped freely from his chin. Exactly 300 feet away, across a sprawling, sparking chasm of machinery, Strike Captain Zir stood at Terminal Beta. The towering alien warrior had discarded his ruined silver helmet. His golden eyes locked onto the frail human across the room. "On my mark!" Eric screamed, his voice tearing his throat. "We pull on 3, 1, 2, 3. Driven by a unified desperation that transcended millions of years of evolution, the mortal engineer and the alien commander threw their combined weight backward. The heavy levers locked into place with a resounding, heavy metallic click. For one agonizing second, nothing happened. Then, the automated system voice spoke one final time. Quantum core engaged. Reality anchor deploying. Armor jettison sequence initiated. The massive dreadnought did not fire a devastating laser. Instead, the colossal, matte black outer hull violently shattered outward, dissolving into billions of harmless metallic flakes. The beast shed its ancient skin to reveal its true heart. A gigantic, spinning quantum reactor, glowing with a brilliant, blinding blue light, was exposed directly to the vacuum of space. It pulsed once, twice, and then released the reality anchor wave. It was not a wave of destruction. It was an impossibly beautiful, silent tsunami of pure crystalline energy that cascaded across the entire solar system. Where the glowing blue wave touched the screaming void storm, reality instantly stitched itself back together. The terrifying black hole did not violently explode. It simply collapsed inward, smoothed out, and faded away, leaving behind the peaceful, twinkling starlight that had been hidden for millennia. But salvation came with a permanent price. As the reality anchor wave washed over the surviving alien armada and the planetary cities below, it violently reset the local quantum physics. The glowing plasma weapons of the dreadnoughts sputtered and died forever. The impenetrable energy grids encasing the planets flickered out. The delicate, tachyon-based engines of the immortal fleet completely shut down, turning their majestic vessels into nothing more than floating, harmless scrap metal. The universe was healed, but the magic of the gods was extinguished. Stripped of its outer shell and its ancient core completely drained, the skeletal remains of the Terran ship lost all power. It drifted gently, quietly, and entirely harmlessly into a stable, geostationary orbit right above the alien capital. Hours later, the silence on the dead Terran command deck was broken by the heavy hiss of the manual airlock. Because their advanced teleporters and glowing ships were now useless, the highest rulers of the Elder Council had been forced to use a primitive, chemical thrust shuttle just to reach the orbital wreck. Grand Minister Vale and High Admiral Kalen stepped onto the dark, freezing metal floor. They were not wearing their majestic, glowing crowns. They walked slowly, flanked by Strike Captain Zier. They found Eric Birch slumped heavily in the captain chair. He was wrapped in a thermal blanket, bruised, exhausted, and staring blankly out the viewport at the restored stars. The immortal kings did not draw their weapons. They did not speak of conquest or demand answers. Vael, the absolute ruler of 1,000,000,000 souls, looked at the frail, bleeding human whose forgotten species had sacrificed their final monument to save a universe that had left them behind. Slowly, deliberately, the Grand Minister dropped to his knees on the rusted steel floor. High Admiral Kalen followed, bowing his head in profound reverence. Behind them, Zier knelt as well. They offered no words, only the heavy, silent acknowledgement that the era of their boundless arrogance had ended forever, making way for the beginning of the Terran epoch. Thank you so sincerely for listening to the conclusion of our story today. We would love to know where in the world you are tuning in from. So please share your city or country in the comments below. As we mentioned earlier, YouTube has disabled our monetization, leaving us without the funds to keep going. If you enjoyed this journey and want to help our dedicated staff feed their families and continue creating these universes for you, please consider supporting us with just $1. You can scan the QR code on your screen or use the donation link in the description or pinned comment. Your kindness keeps the stars shining for us. Thank you.